Okay. Dr. Jacqueline Leonard is a professor of mathematics education at the University of Wyoming. She taught in public schools for 16 years before receiving her doctorate from the University of Maryland. In August 2012, Dr. Leonard was appointed as the first African American director of the Science and Math Teaching Center at the University of Wyoming. She's the principal investigator on the Bessie Coleman project, which uses lessons in aeronautics to engage elementary and middle grade students in learning mathematics and science. Dr. Leonard has received numerous awards and recognitions, including a Fulbright Research Chair in STEM education at the University of Calgary in 2018-19, Outstanding Research and Scholarship at the University of Wyoming in 2017-18, and Leadership Dedication and Advocacy from the Committee on Women and People of Color from the University of Wyoming in 2016. Today, she's going to tell us about a project involving aeronautics and culturally specific pedagogy in the Wind River Indian Reservation. Let's welcome her and listen to what she has to say.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen with the PowerPoint presentation. I'm just delighted to be part of this Math for All conference, and thank you very much for inviting me. I am truly honored to be here today. And unfortunately, I can't be with you in person due to the ongoing pandemic, but it looks like the are popular in getting the job done. So happy to be here with you. So I'm calling this presentation today, Facilitating Computational Participation with Indigenous Students. The work that I've been doing on the NSF project that you see in the corner, which is called the Bessie Coleman Project, which I'll speak more about later, deals with computational thinking within the context of culturally relevant pedagogy and place-based education, as Victor so graciously introduced. And I would like to, first of all, just talk a little bit about computational participation and what that is in relation to computational thinking. So computational thinking is an algorithmic way of problem solving so that a student can go through a process to get to the solution to a problem. And there are lots of ways that they can do that, such as using organized thinking in those kinds of ways. But computational participation was introduced by Cafe and Burke in their book entitled Learning to Code in 2014 as a way for people to engage together and to participate together in problem solving, particularly around issues that were important to the community. So that is one of the aspects that I want you to keep in mind. To introduce the particular project, we of course want to look at some of the things that are going on in society. And so we know that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that there's going to be an extensive number of positions in STEM. And especially with the pandemic now having taken a toll on employment numbers, being able to do computing and to work from home and to collaborate across different platforms as we are now, we see the importance of having that knowledge and being able to do that. And students who may not have been capable of having wireless computing in their homes, many of them are having to do that now in terms of even getting educated. So it is definitely an important area that we should be focusing on. The job outlook a couple of years ago talked about 51% of all jobs requiring computer science knowledge. And that number is probably even higher now that we've experienced what we have with the pandemic. Yet less than 11% of all underrepresented minorities, that includes African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans combined, had positions in the field of computer science, according to the National Science Foundation in 2017. So that was the impetus for doing the work that we're doing with underrepresented populations on the Wind River Reservation, as well as other settings to help um, bring an awareness about computational thinking as well as computer science to the classroom and to after school settings. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, um, the STEM research on Indigenous students is often deficit orientation and void of social justice. In fact, some of the research that talks about cultural relevance has been critiqued by Canadian scholars because they bring up the fact that Native Americans have been stripped of their culture. They've been told that their culture is not a good thing, and lots of negative experiences that children have had, such as what we call the residential schools, where they were taken from their homes and put in residential schools where they lived all the time, probably with the exceptions of vacations. It was to actually take and strip their culture from them. So having experienced sort of a colonized approach to learning and to their culture, then all of a sudden people now want them to bring their culture back in. And so some of the Native American students that I've worked with have questioned, what is their culture? What are you looking for me to do? How am I being Native American versus just being American in the way that I'm responding to lessons? So that it becomes sort of a critical issue then when we think about culture in that way, because they've been stripped of their culture. They don't know what all their background was or is. And so it's difficult to think about it from that point of view. But we attempted to use a decolonized, place-based approach with culturally specific pedagogy that at least gets at maybe the finite culture of that particular tribe to broaden STEM participation among Arapaho children and youth on the Wind River Reservation. To give you a little bit of background about some of the philosophies related to working with Indigenous children, I looked at, since I am not Indigenous myself, I don't have any DNA according to Ancestry and 23andMe that would suggest that I have any Native American blood. So I rely on what the scholars have said in order to do some of this work. And the Indigenous scholars have used the term Indigenous knowledge systems to highlight the lived experiences, philosophies, beliefs, and values, and the educational processes of entire communities. So they look at what is knowledge, what is valued, and what is taught as a way of thinking about IKS, or Indigenous knowledge systems. And so in terms of looking at working with these communities, we wanted to ground their STEM learning in their oral traditions to create powerful stories, and also looking at the Western knowledge ways of generating knowledge too, because as some of the research that I read, you really can't have one without the other. Just like any other racialized minority in this country, we actually live in the country and we have to interact and engage with people in the country. So it's important to know about the Western ways of knowledge in order to be able to just live and work and communicate. But then you also need to know about your own background and culture so that you don't forget where you came from. So trying to walk that line between what you should know and what you need to know has been a delicate balance in this research. So some of the history of the Wind River Reservation, this is actually a photo that one of the staff members drew for the project that we had in the summer of 2019 on the Wind River Reservation, which is the data that I'm going to be presenting today, where this outline here is the entire Wind River Reservation. And the staff member drew a drone in the center there to represent some of the work that we would be doing that summer. And that was a really cool thing. And then they used the Arapaho language, to which this word here actually stands for drone, or what they say, eyes see. That is the interpretation of this word, these two words. But the school is located on the Wind River Reservation, and the Wind River Reservation is a part of um, the central western Wyoming. As over here, we've identified the population. This would have been probably the 2018 population of 26,500 people living near a town in Riverton, which is 11,000 people. The town of Riverton is predominantly white, and the location is between the Wind River Mountains and in the eastern slope. The reservation was established in 1868, which would have been after the Civil War, just to contextualize it, under the Second Treaty of Fort Bridger between the Eastern Shoshone and the US government. And so one of the things to point out is that the Shoshone actually are now the minority of Native Americans living on the Wind River Reservation, but they were the original occupants. Somewhere in their history, the United States government promised the Arapaho people land that they never got, and they were temporarily placed on the Wind River Reservation as a temporary home. But the temporary home became a permanent home. And now the Arapaho actually outnumber the Shoshone on the Wind River Reservation. And I'm actually working with Arapaho tribes and children there. There is some friction between Arapaho and Shoshone tribes because of what happened with that. And there were lawsuits and all these other kinds of things to compensate the Shoshone for the land that's being used by the Arapaho. But at the present time, the Wind River is approximately 2.3 million acres, or about 3,800 square miles. So this is a pretty large area. I've not driven the entire area, but as I drive through Riverton to stay in the hotel and through the reservation to get to that, I've been on roads that have winded through the reservation, but it was only probably a piece of the reservation in terms of its vastness. So there actually was a lot more land besides what I just explained, but a lot of it had been ceded back to the government for different reasons. So the theoretical framework that supports the IKS is tribal critical race theory, which is also called tribal crit. And tribal crit is a branch of critical race theory. There are 9 tenets that Brayboy talks about in his 2005 paper. I'm only going to emphasize 4 in this particular presentation because those are the 4 that pretty much explain our work. So colonization is endemic to society is their first one, which means that everything about their lives has been dictated by colonization and colonization efforts, including trying to incorporate or the languages, English as the spoken language, the education system, and that kind of thing. The US policies that have been implemented towards Indigenous people in the past has been rooted in imperialism, white supremacy, and desire for material gain. That's one of the reasons why their reservation is the size that it is now. People have taken some of the land through treaty, and some of it has been ceded back in order to get benefits such as education and things like that. Indigenous people, according to Brayboy, also occupy a liminal space that accounts for both the political and racialized natures of their identities. And they're still struggling with how their identities are being interpreted even today, as we talk about the different teams that have used their names, like the Atlanta Braves and you know, how they are really not wanting to have those images associated with sports teams. Government policies and educational policies towards the people have been linked to the problem of assimilation. And the people have actually worked very diligently to gain access and control over their schools. And they were able to do that in Wyoming, um, and also to have some successful lawsuits around equity where the schools were not funded at the same level as other schools. So the research questions that were related to the Bessie Coleman project, which I'll again talk about more as time goes on, were written to kind of think about and to honor the people. My visit as a Fulbright scholar to the University of Calgary and working with some Indigenous people in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, I learned that it's just not the best to try to impose what we want to do on the people. So thinking about their culture and their traditions and making them owners, co facilitators was a great thing. And it was something that I had to learn over time. I didn't always have this concept when I first went to Wyoming, but it was something that I developed over time, especially after having been a Fulbright scholar and listening to Indigenous people in other parts of North America helped me to see the people in Wyoming a little bit differently. So the research questions were not determined a priori, but emerged from the data and the artifacts that were collected during the summer STEM camp. The three questions examine the role of language, story, culture, and place in STEM learning, in addition to looking at traditional forms of survey data. So the first question actually deals with the survey data that we gave to students to try to capture their beliefs about computers and technology, as well as their efficacy in computational thinking and science, and how that changed as a result of the study. We also looked at what the instructors were doing with language and story, as with the diagram that we just showed, that I just showed you a moment ago, about how they even use the animal hides to show the drone in the center of the reservation, and how they were looking at using the drone to learn more about their land. So we'll be looking at that, and we'll also look at how culture and place were used to enhance the children's learning about aviation and drones, which are also called unmanned area vehicles, or UAVs. Mixed methods were used to collect and analyze data. Again, the stories and the narratives created by the people themselves, their families, and their relationships to land, air, and water were important. We used the case study method to tell the stories about the Indigenous children and the youth. And then we looked at their journaling to help produce counter narratives, which was a core basis for some of the findings. So now, in terms of the project itself, which was funded by the National Science Foundation in 2018, the Bessie Coleman Project is named for the first African American and Native woman. Her father was Native American, her mother was African American, to receive a pilot's license in Paris, France in the 1920s. She provided underrepresented students with a role model that they could identify with, especially since she was Native American, as an entree to the STEM program. And this particular one was a summer program. And so the purpose of the study was to, like I said previously, provide an additional counter narrative about Indigenous students, so that we can see what talent and skills they bring to computing, as well as give them opportunities to learn that those skills might be able to be used more productively to help their communities in the future. So again, we wanted to provide opportunities for meaningful technology. And so the students, they learned about flight. They learned about, they participated in flight simulation on computers and they used the drones to advance their knowledge about their land, the water, and the plants on the Wind River Reservation. So again, the study took place at the Arapahoe School, which is located on the Wind River Reservation, and the majority of the students who participated were Arapahoe. The school is in close proximity to several archaeological sites that held special significance to this particular tribe. One is known as a buffalo jump, which is identified as the line of cliffs where the buffalo would be driven off, and then as they fell, um, they would be killed instantaneously, maybe, and then everything, including their hide, their meat, they would use all of those aspects for the tribe to get clothing and food and artifacts. They also had teepee rings and stones set around the base that can be found as they camped out around this buffalo jump, which is part of the history of the Wind River Reservation that some of the students didn't even know about until they participated in this project. So in terms of the participants, we had one teacher and two staff members who identified as Arapahoe, and two additional staff members who had significant work on the Wind River Reservation that identified as white. Interestingly enough, the students in this summer camp were multiple members of the same family. And so we had multi-age students, which was a little different than some of the other after-school programs and camps that we've participated in the past. And so 23 Arapahoe students from grades 4 to 11 were enrolled in the camp. And that's because you had siblings from the same family that wanted to participate together. And so in looking at the data in this way, we had 6 families among other individuals that participated in the study. And so when we looked at analyzing the data, we thought that one way to do that and to give credence to the kinship relationships as well as the counter narratives was to look at what entire siblings had to say about their experience, entire families. So the learning activities centered on the principles of flight, cartography, and image capture. The students learned about Bernoulli's principle from one of our special guests who was a United Airlines pilot. And they followed up with tasks that helped them to learn more about that principle. They learned to fly drones and to use flight simulation software. Part of their drone experience included basic maneuvering, such as taking off, flying specific patterns, such as figure eights, and landing safely in a landing zone. And the photograph on my right is actually a photo that was taken by one of the drones, not during the summer camp, but prior to that, at a rock formation area near Laramie, where the university is located, which is called Vedaville. And so this is just to give you an idea of the landscape and the rock formation and the kinds of things that students would be able to take pictures of with the drone. Our data sources and data analysis included the quantitative and qualitative measures. We had a 4-part survey that measured the beliefs about computer and technology use, as well as computational thinking and science efficacy. That survey was developed by Diane Jazz Kettlehut and Will Jordan, who were former colleagues of mine at Temple University. Other qualitative sources included the students' journals, their work samples and photographs. The T-statistic was used to analyze the survey data, and the constant comparative method was used to analyze the students' journals. And again, like I said before, we wanted to look at these data holistically, drawing upon research that looked at family engagement as pairs and triads of siblings participated in the study. So when we look at the student survey results, we have some interesting findings. First of all, when it comes to using the computer or computer use to solve problems, on a 5-point Likert scale, the scores were about in the middle, without much change and certainly no significant results. We're not exactly sure if we had enough computer use in problem solving, since we focused on drones primarily in this particular camp, which was only 1 week, which does tend to lend itself to children being in the middle and not having much of a change. But in terms of their computational thinking efficacy, which is using the computer to, using an algorithmic process to solve problems, what was interesting is that the students did have a significant increase. And even though there was a small number who took the pre and the post test, we had over 20 students to take the pre-test. And within the week, as we went through some activities, some students preferred not. It was just, I keep telling my survey directors that it's important for the surveys not to be too long. And there were over 50 questions. And so the students struggled to complete the survey as a pre-test on the first day. And imagine having to answer 50 questions again on the last day when it's only a 5-day camp. We didn't have a lot of students interested in doing that. So we are limited in size, but still we have a significant significance at the 0.001 level on computational thinking, with a very large effect size, even for 11. So I felt that it was good to put that there. And I really do believe that it wasn't just computational thinking, but the computational participation that they were going through at the time when they were problem solving about the flight simulation activities, as well as the drone capture that produced that. In terms of science efficacy, we did have an increase, but it was not significant enough to say that there was anything one way or the other about that. But in terms of technology interest and usefulness, there was also a significant change there with a medium effect size, which was also interesting, because they could see with the activities they were doing how much more useful technology was. Looking at the surveys by item, I thought that it would be interesting to just pull out the lowest number and the highest mean, and the lowest mean on the post and the pre-test around the two items that were significant, two scales that were significant. So I can figure out what to do when a problem is complex. On the pre-test, it had the lowest mean. When solving a problem, I can break the problem into smaller parts. On the pre-test, it had the highest mean. Then when we looked at the post-test, when a computer program doesn't work like I wanted to, I'm able to fix it. That was the lowest mean. And I can figure out several ways to solve a problem was the highest mean. So again, where students were when they came in for the week and where they were at the end of the week was different. But I just thought that these kind of items might have given us more idea about the survey and what the students were expecting. What was interesting on the technology interest and usefulness pre-test was these students didn't enjoy videos in class. That was their lowest mean. And, a lot of times students, you would think they want to see a video, but some students can read through that and know that teachers are showing the video because they don't want to teach or something like that. Technology is only for bright people. Interestingly, that was one of the highest means on the pre-test. So hopefully we were able to counter against that particular thought after the study was over, because that did not show up on the post-test as one of the highs. So the low on the post-test was technology is as difficult for girls as it is for boys. We're happy that that's low. That means that the students don't believe that. Technology makes school more interesting. We were happy to see that students were at least in, well, actually on that particular scale, it was a 4-point Likert scale. So on that scale, 3.14 was actually that they agree with that. So that was a good outcome. In terms of the students' journals, this is where I think we have the richest data about what students learned and their use of language and story, and demonstrating their understanding about Bernoulli's law, the principles of flight, the importance of knowing the conditions needed to fly an airplane or a drone. And so again, I went through the data and organized it by siblings in the same family. And Leah, which is a pseudonym for this one student, she talked about learning how to fly a drone, and how the earth ain't flat, and that the grasses and the buffalo used to run off. And she learned about all the ecological kinds of things concerning that. And they learned about maps. But you know, it's interesting how with the sentences, they're not they're capturing different things all at once. They're not talking about one thing specifically. But Selena does mention as the velocity goes up, the pressure goes down. This is Bernoulli's principle. And so she had that in her notes, and she understood what that meant in terms of how pressure worked to help things fly. Other things that came up in the journal was this notion of verbification, which is Lisa Borden's work in Nova Scotia, where you give inanimate objects some kind of movement or physical attributes. And so the students were speaking about drones in that way. And so in terms of flying home or going home, having a camera and taking a picture, making fun games that were similar to with the flight simulation around what they were doing. So we see the word fun over and over again. We see information about flying and about making maps and cameras and photos and those kinds of things. So that was pretty much a lot of what was going on with students' journals around the drones. So the journals were also analyzed for themes, and 21 students, I'm sorry, out of the 23 students, 20 students had journals that were turned in and analyzed for themes and patterns. And 40% of the journals made references to maps. Went back too far. The school was close to several archaeological sites, but what was interesting was that one student said she found her house on Google, and I thought that that was really interesting to look for where you lived on Google Maps. One student thought that the maps were a little boring, so you know, in all honesty, we want to include those kinds of comments from students as well. But they enjoyed looking at Google Earth and looking at the maps for the most part. 100% of the journals consisted of comments related to the drone, so that was a big hit. 60% of the students mentioned its maneuvering capabilities and its ability to track people. I learned that drones can follow people. That was really interesting to them. They really wanted to have the drones following their siblings. And one student even recorded the river, and they made a photo collage out of some of the pictures that they took. So in terms of identity themes, two of those themes that emerged from 4 students' logs was what we call presencing, where everything is capturing the moment. And so while flying a drone, I took group pictures. Me and blank took pictures together from the drone. And so here you see students sitting at the buffalo jump A drone is taking their photograph here, and I'm happy that it's the back of their heads so that we don't have to worry about consent for the photograph. But they enjoyed just taking pictures of the landscape. The other thing that I found was how calm everybody was. Not that they weren't calm in the classroom setting during the school day, but when they went out to this buffalo jump, which was about an hour away from the school, uh, the serenity and the reflection and the solemnness, um, almost a sacredness, was just really imminent among the students out there. Another thing was with this tracking, uh, many of the young boys would skateboard during the break outside. And I found that the tracking and the videoing of them skateboarding was something that became a theme too. And it also made me think about the kinds of activities that kids are engaged in on the reservation. Sometimes we think that they're different from ordinary kids, but when you think about them skateboarding, you think about them as ordinary kids. Ordinary kids would skateboard. And so it challenges our own biases. I heard one of the facilitators talk about biases before we got started here, and we all do have them. And so, you know, these concepts that we have of Indigenous people doing what, I don't know. But these kids are skateboarding and having fun and doing fun things like ordinary, everyday kids, which they are. They are. So, in terms of just gathering information, of course, I had to leave a lot out for the presentation. But in terms of gathering information and looking at our data, what we found was um, four important things. Um, First of all, the students' efficacy and computational thinking increased significantly along with their beliefs about technology and its use in society. That is particularly interesting because we've done this project in many locations, including urban areas in Philadelphia. We're going to be working with urban students in Memphis this spring. And we don't always have the significant markers. Sometimes it's just not a lot of growth where you've been engaging the students for a week or a few weeks and you just don't move the needle. But to be able to move the needle with these students in 5 days is important, and I don't want to minimize that. Second, in order to work with the reservation uh, better than I had in the past, I gave autonomy to the Native teachers and the staff to develop the curriculum that they wanted the students to do with the drones. And I found that that was very empowering, and perhaps that might have led to the results of the survey that I mentioned a moment ago. In the past, as a researcher, there were things I wanted. I wanted the data. I wanted the concepts. I wanted, you know, kids to know science. I wanted them. I mean, when we want certain things, we try to push our agenda on people, and sometimes we get the results we want, and sometimes we don't. And with certain populations, they don't always respond well to that kind of authoritarianism, or in this particular case, they might call it colonialism. So giving the teachers the autonomy and the opportunity to shape what the kids would do really made the difference. I would have never thought about a buffalo jump. I wouldn't even have that in my concept. I wouldn't know how vast the Wind River Reservation was, and think about drawing it and using Arapaho words to describe a drone. That was the teachers. And so the instructor's use of place and culture helped to bring out the learning and to help the students to tell rich stories about their communities. And later, after the summer program was over, they had a storyteller to come in and to work with them on developing a book about what they did in the summer to tell about their experiences with the drones. And so in terms of broadening participation with Indigenous peoples, we have to acknowledge that, yeah, we want people to have, you know, successful jobs, and being an airline or a drone pilot can give you large income, but Indigenous people prefer relational rather than transactional relationships. And if they can do it from the reservation, they are all for it. They don't want to leave their homes. They don't want to leave their communities and their families. And this is understandable, very understandable. And so technology then becomes a way that they can not have to leave, as long as they have the towers and the broadband and everything accessible to them, which they do. So in conclusion, the computational participation occurred when the students engaged in drone technology together as siblings and fictive kin. The case study that used the counter narratives to describe the Arapaho students' experiences did help to facilitate STEM learning, not in all of the ways that I wanted, but in ways that I didn't even expect. The instructional team's knowledge and experiences were critical in designing the learning experiences that helped to bring out the place and the culture at a finer scale than I would have even imagined. One of the facilitators had a relief map of the entire state of Wyoming and was able to show the students where the Wind River Reservation was within that. And because it was a relief map, you could see the mountains and where it sat in the mountain range. So continued exposures to projects of this nature, as well as looking at the ESTEM curriculum, which teachers came up with. They actually called it that, even though, you know, I didn't have that terminology. And interestingly enough, when I went back to the literature, there that technology was already as part of the literature. So it really helped to have one of the facilitators who had really this knowledge and background from ecology working with us. And so the critical pedagogy was helpful. It came out in trying to decolonize the research, and it encouraged the students to pursue careers, at least the thought, I should say, encourage them to pursue the thought of a STEM career. A few of them did mention that it might be cool to be an airline pilot or a drone pilot, but a lot of students, no matter what their background, they're just looking at today. They're looking at right now. They're looking at next week. They don't look like 10 years ahead of time. So a lot of times too, we don't have the follow-up to know exactly what happened and who did what either. But I will stop here. Here's the reference list, and I will entertain questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Leonard.
so much.